After this he flew to Shanghai, began talks with the Japanese, and became the new puppet ruler. But he was given very real little power or support. So to try and drum up his own support, Wang portrayed himself as the true successor to Sun Yat-sen, often playing on Sun's pan-Asian ideals. That same year, Japan also played on these ideals, with the creation of the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere. Manchukuo Mengjiang and Wang Jingwei obviously joined this, but the Japanese still had plans to create other puppet states in China. For instance, around this time, Yan Zishang debated switching over allegiances. He, after all, like many, had studied in Japan and had connections in the Japanese army. Plus, he also began to despise the communists. However, nothing came of this. So the Japanese looked elsewhere to find an ally among the Muslim generals in the West. For instance, they approached Ma Hongquei of Ningxia, but he refused. The Ma clique and many Muslims had fought to defend China ever since the Boxer Rebellion, and they were determined to continue the fight. Ma Hongquei even arrested the Mongol leader Darijaya, believing that he was about to switch sides. Muslim leaders like Hu Songshang were instrumental in drumming up support among the population. He actually told Muslims to salute the Chinese flag during morning prayers, and created his own prayer. Protect us from the evil deeds done by the violent Japanese. They have occupied our cities and killed our people. Send upon them a furious wind, cause their airplanes to fall in the wilderness, and their battleships to sink in the sea. But, had things gone differently, the route to Xinjiang would have been open, and maybe Japan could look again at helping to create the East Turkestan state. They already had agents in the region, especially around Hami, and in 1939 they had established contacts with Tibet as well. Jinzo Nomoto had spent years studying Mongolian, so he just pretended to be a Mongolian to travel through into Tibet. This was mainly an intelligence gathering mission rather than a diplomatic mission though, and it could have been part of a larger plan to set up ties with the Afghans. This means the Muslim generals like Ma Hongquei had essentially stopped China from being completely surrounded. And although small in comparison, the Battle of West Wei Yan in 1940 ended Japan's plans further inland. So by this point, Japan began to turn their attention elsewhere. Supplies were still arriving in China via Vietnam, but in 1940, France had fallen, and Japan sent an ultimatum to the governor of Indochina, George Catrow, demanding he close off the supply routes. He actually agreed to this, but the Japanese just demanded more and more, showing that they were set on invading. This invasion occurred in September 1940, when they crossed the border and occupied the entire region. For a little while, even the British agreed to close off their roads into China after the Japanese pressured them as well. But the Burma Road was later reopened. Yet with the fall of Indochina, the Japanese signed a non-aggression pact with the Soviets and began to turn away from China entirely. In 1941 there were a few offensives, but they all ended in failure. Mainly though, their country was suffering from a lack of resources and they needed oil, rubber and a great deal more. So the government began to listen to the Navy, and they adopted the Southern Strike Doctrine, attacking Dutch East Indies, Malaysia, Singapore, the Philippines, Hong Kong, Hawaii and more. This initially gave them the resources they needed, but now they were at war with the Allies. So after the Japanese failed to take Changsha a couple more times, the front in China continued in a stalemate. The Chinese on the other hand had problems of their own, as the united front between the communists and the nationalists had collapsed. Chiang and the other nationalist leaders realized the problems with aligning with the communists, and to understand this, we need to go back in time a bit. Even though the Japanese had conquered the northeast, there were still some small holdouts, like just outside of Shanghai. This was held by the KMT, while the communists set up a base in Yangzhou just nearby. The communist new 4th Army back in 1940 clashed with the nationalists in Huangqiao and overran their position. This was just a small battle, but it put the communists in the best position to recruit people in one of the most populous parts of the country. So Chiang ordered that the communists should retreat north of the Yangtze River. This, however, was ignored, so Chiang ambushed the new 4th Army in the town of Maolin in 1941. Many of the reports disagree over why the demand was ignored and even who fired the first shots, but this was essentially the end of the United Front. The communists quickly rebuilt the new 4th Army and began to recruit even more people into their ranks, working behind enemy lines. often portraying Chiang and the KMT as treasonous for fighting their fellow Chinese during the war. Civil war was largely avoided though, thanks to the USSR and the USA, who stepped in to dissuade both sides. Yet for Mao, saving his base in Yan'an, still had problems of his own. For starters, there were still other prominent leaders who could challenge his power, and many of these were preferred by the Soviet Union, like Wang Ming or other Russian-trained communists. Plus, the Communist Party had spread across northern China. This left thousands of people outside of his central control, and they could become a threat. So he launched the Yan'an Rectification Movement. In short, he advocated thought reform in schools to gain an army of young and loyal followers. Alongside this, struggle sessions were introduced. This was when party members would accuse others of being anti-revolutionaries, liberals, nationalist spies and the likes. Plus, by having such a loyal group of followers following the party line, Mao could completely decentralize his control, leaving his loyal supporters to keep the other party members in check. This was completely different to Stalin's approach in the USSR, as he relied on the KGB and the likes. Mao also deviated from the Soviet Union in ideology as well. For instance, he long favoured peasantry over city workers as a base for support. But in 1942, the idea of Mao Zedong thought began to appear in newspapers, or in other words, Maoism was born. One man who was crucial to Mao's success was Kang Sheng. He had trained in Russia and returned with one tactic which he used as the head of Mao's early secret police. This was the use of torture to gain confessions, which usually included an accusation against other party members. So although they didn't follow Soviet philosophy exactly, they did use their tactics. And it should be said that the communists did not take so many casualties in comparison to the KMT. Even Zhou Enlai admitted in his report to Stalin in 1940, saying only 3% of the total casualties were communists. So Mao was buying time and using the war to bolster his own position. Some historians like Endo Homare even point out that Mao, through spies like Pan Hanian, had some connections to the Japanese. He allegedly proposed truces with their puppet governments and planned on stretching out the war for as long as possible. This could be somewhat backed up by Mao's future actions when he thanked the Japanese for the war itself. Like in 1956, he said, "You are also our gentlemen, and we want to thank you. It is really you who have fought this war, educated the Chinese people, and united the scattered Chinese people, so we should be grateful to you." But going back to the front, the Japanese made plans to move into Sichuan in 1942, but this never happened, as Japan by this point had just become too overstretched. Yet they still heavily bombed Chongqing. These bombings began back in 1938 and continued for 5 years. Over 30,000 people were killed during them, and over 30,000 buildings were destroyed. To make matters worse, around Henan, harvests failed in 1942. Much of the remaining food was being taken by the Japanese and Chinese troops that divided the region, so a famine ensued. This killed hundreds of thousands of people, and the survivors resorted to cannibalism and selling their own children. As the war slowly began to turn against Japan in the Pacific, they turned back to Southeast Asia to finally cut off Chinese supplies for good. They marched into Burma through Thailand, which had already joined the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere. From here they threatened British India and Yunnan. So many Chinese participated in the defense of Burma, but the Allied command in this area was somewhat disjointed. Joseph Stilwell, for instance, was an American who arrived in China and tried to help lead the war effort. But he believed the British were just trying to protect their colony in India, while Chiang just wanted to hoard US weapons to later fight against the communists. Plus, Chiang Kai-shek met with Indian leaders like Gandhi and expressed his support for their independence movement. So all sides were looking out for their own interests. Nevertheless, there was an unexpected morale boost for the Chinese, as volunteer American pilots, the Flying Tigers, arrived in China after the fall of Burma. Plus, even though Burma fell, supplies still came in via the hump. This saw material airlifted from northeast India, over the Himalayas and into Kunming. So throughout 1943, the fighting was conducted along the borders of Burma and China. The Japanese could never break through the lines fully though, and move up into Yunnan. So to try and help draw the Chinese troops away from Southeast Asia, they attacked Chengde, and although they captured the city, they soon had to withdraw. The KMT though were now getting somewhat overconfident. After years of little movement, they turned west to Xinjiang. Chiang Kai still ruled there, but even back in 1942, KMT soldiers began to move to their borders. This they were able to do because the Soviets at that point were fighting against the Nazis. While the Battle of Stalingrad was raging, Chiang Kai tried to sever ties with the Soviets, as he himself was not really a communist. So he hoped to mend relations with the KMT and remove the communist threat to his rule. Chiang demanded that the Soviets retreat, and he arrested Mao's younger brother, Mao Zemin, who had been in the region for years. Under torture, Mao's brother revealed that there was a communist plot to remove him from power. So by mid-1943, the Soviets were forced to leave, and Chiang invited the KMT to fill his country. However, when the tide of war turned, Chiang tried to appeal to the Soviets once more, arresting KMT members and asking Stalin for help. Obviously, no help came, so Chiang Kai stepped down. But the Soviets found a new ally in the old East Turkestan rebels. Many of them had fled to Russia after their failed rebellions, and in 1944, their Ili National Army crossed the border alongside Russian troops. At the same time, a Kazakh named Osman Batur had been rebelling against the rulers of Xinjiang for a couple of years. In Altai he was elected Khan, and the Soviets saw another possible alliance here. So the KMT sent Ma Bufang to deal with the Kazakhs and the Uyghurs who were rebelling. But again, things get complicated in Xinjiang. Not all the East Turkestan rebels supported this new rebellion. Even the old leader, Mohammed Amin Bogla, argued against the Soviet intervention. So now hundreds of thousands of Chinese troops were in Burma and Xinjiang. While on the main front, spies revealed that the Japanese were planning a huge counterattack. Chiang, however, ignored this, believing the stalemate which had been in place since 1940 would continue. But he was wrong, and in April 1944, Operation Ichigo began. 500,000 Japanese soldiers attacked from the north and south, and overwhelmed the Chinese in many towns like Luoyang and Changsha. By the time the Japanese arrived in Guilin late in the year, many Chinese just retreated without fighting, their morale completely shaken. By the end of the year, 750,000 Chinese were left dead, and this defeat was so bad that Stilwell tried to get Roosevelt to send an ultimatum to Chiang, demanding that he should be put in control of the Chinese army. This was of course rejected, but it showed a shift in foreigners' attitudes towards the KMT and communist parties. Many now saw the KMT as corrupt and ineffective. Brooks Atkinson, for instance, wrote, "The KMT was an anti-democratic regime that is more concerned with maintaining its political
Oh my God!
than driving the Japanese out of China."
Oh my God!
Visit Yan'an.
Okay, I beat it.
Yan'an, a Chinese wonderland city, where he described Maoism as the best system for China, as it was an agrarian...
Okay, thank you, Chairman Mao. Okay, let's count attempts. Oh my God, I actually beat it. Okay, I beat it. Damn, I didn't... Oh, what? Okay. At Ben, at Free, at Big. Okay, damn, okay. Let's get my phone out and count attempts. Oh my God. 雪花飘飘，北风萧萧。雪花飘。Okay, damn. 5344 plus. Oh my God. Okay. 4551. Okay. Yo, I beat core 93, 999, 999. Where's my comma? Attempts. Oh my God. Okay. I beat it. Okay. First list points. Thank you, Chairman Mao, first of all, for my successes.